my top 10 players going into the 2025 season that are returning. Big 12 schedule announcement. We'll be discussing some key matchups early on in the season to keep your eye out for. My reaction to the On3 top 25 coaches list that was just announced, and some interesting win totals for the 2025 season just announced by FanDuel. This is the Love for the Game podcast. And welcome in, everybody, to our very first episode of the Love for the Game podcast. I'm your host, Reed Napper. It is Wednesday, February 5th. Happy National Signing Day. We will be doing a full recap of National Signing Day either Thursday or Friday this week, so keep an eye out on all the socials listed up there for when we will be doing a full recap of National Signing Day. Can't wait to get into it. Now, as I preface in my intro, this is the Love for the Game podcast, and we will be talking about my top 10 returning players for the 2025 season. Now, this is obviously going to stir the pot. This is going to be controversial to many people, and it obviously this is my opinion of who are the top 10 returning players in 2025. Now, at number 10, we have a combination of Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. Now, their impact on Penn State was immense. Obviously, both rushed for over 1,000 yards, literally carried Penn State along with Tyler Warren and Drew Howard to the Orange Bowl, the College Football Playoff semifinals, and a heartbreaking loss to Notre Dame. Now, it will be interesting to keep an eye out for these two, mainly because of how they played in 2024. Obviously, both rushing for over 1,000 yards, but without Tyler Warren being the mainstay of the offense there anymore, what will their output be as the main focal point of the offense? Now, there's obviously questions surrounding the receivers still at Penn State. Who will be the number one receiver at Penn State? Time will obviously tell. But I'm just curious, who will Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen be going into this season? And will they be able to replicate their impacts on the field? Obviously, Penn State's offensive line in some circles is said to be better coming into the season. We'll obviously see as time progresses through spring ball and winter lifts and stuff like that. But obviously, the impact that Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen had on the field was incredible for Penn State, and they are my number 10 combination of players returning for 2025. At number 9, we have Sam Leavitt, quarterback at Arizona State. Obviously, Arizona State, arguably one of the best seasons in school history, getting to the College Football Playoff, winning the Big 12 after being picked last by the media to finish in the Big 12, beating Iowa State in the Big 12 championship, making it to the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl and losing to Texas in heartbreaking fashion in double overtime. Now, Sam Leavitt transferred from Michigan State going into Arizona State. Jaden Rashada was there when he was there, and obviously took a bigger step forward than people were expecting him to. Obviously he was said to be a good enough quarterback. Obviously he's at Michigan State, left, went to Arizona State, and now carried them to one of their best seasons of school history. And I'm curious how he carries that momentum from 2024 going into the 25-26 season. Now he does get his number one target, Jordan Tyson, back, and the impact that they had, Jordan Tyson over 1,000 yards receiving. Will Sam Leavitt be able to replicate that? Obviously without Cam Scatabo as well at running back, straight dog at running back. Will he be able to replicate the passing game that Arizona State had last season going into this season? So that's the reason he got on this list. I just want to be able to see if he can replicate the season he had from last season going into this next season. At number 8, we have Lenore Sellers, quarterback of South Carolina. Now, one of the most interesting players to watch at the quarterback position, in my opinion, in the game today. Freshman this last season, lit the world on fire, took LSU down to the wire. It was like week 3 or 4 last season, and basically put himself on the map that way. South Carolina got hot near the end of the season, almost backdoored their way into the college football playoff. Some still say nowadays that they deserve to be in the college football playoff off of that performance last season. And, based on how close they were to the college football playoff last season, now obviously he comes into this season, they get a transfer quarterback in Aaron Nolan from Ohio State. I don't really think that will have a big enough impact on Lenore Sellers, but I do think it'll add a chip on his shoulder, going into this season, if a transfer quarterback obviously decides to come to South Carolina and Lenore Sellers was just a freshman this past season. Some could question why Aaron Nolan did that in the first place, but that's a completely different conversation. We're talking about Lenore Sellers. I want to see how close he was to the college football playoff this past season and the way he finished that last season with South Carolina, if he can get over the hump and get them into the college football playoff going into next season. At number 7, we have Colin Simmons, defensive end / linebacker, however you want to term it, from Texas. Freshman, once again. Common theme of freshmen on this list, surprisingly, as we get into it. Complete game record. We all know this if you follow him, if you follow Texas. 9 sacks as a freshman is very, very impressive. Can single-handedly disrupt an offensive game plan by himself. And I'm just curious how he's looking to retool. Obviously he was a freshman. He's going to go through a whole offseason program with Texas. They're going to retool that defense to the levels that it was as a top 5 defense it was last season. And I'm curious how he's going to be able to potentially level up his game from his freshman season and be the mainstay of that Texas defense that we saw last season. Number 6, we have Jeremiah Love. Now, arguably the best running back in the country last season. The 2 I have listed at number 10, obviously we're in that discussion. And Jeremiah Love, lit the playoff on fire in that first game against Indiana, a 98-yard touchdown, to open the playoff of the 12-team format. And, gave Penn State a run for their money, didn't really perform to the level against Georgia, obviously got hurt. There were question marks going into the Orange Bowl against Penn State. And that one touchdown where he ran through 6 or 7 guys was just unbelievable. And ultimately catapulted Notre Dame to play for a national championship. Now, questions at the quarterback position, obviously for Notre Dame. Jeremiah Love will be the mainstay, will be the focal point of the offense. They do get a couple receivers back. They get Faison, Westinghouse. They get back. He will still be the focal point of the offense. So some circles are saying that this Notre Dame offensive line could be the best in the country going into next season. And I'm just curious if Jeremiah Love will be able to even I'm sure he'll be able to replicate it on some level, but I'm mainly curious, will he be able to carry Notre Dame to the similar success that they had this past season? Now, personally, I have not looked at their schedule. I don't know who they play on their schedule, but I'm curious to see if he will be able to replicate or even excel this Notre Dame offense to the levels of last season, making it to a national championship. And Loki is a sleeper pick for the Heisman Trophy for me going into next season. Obviously, we'll get onto that later in the discussion. At number 5, we have Caleb Downs, safety for the Ohio State. Transferred from Alabama, after Nick Saban retired. And oh boy, what a player. Arguably, if not the best defensive player in the country, as only a freshman, once again, a freshman. Insane. The best defensive player in the country. He will have to be able to produce at the same level that he did last season for Ohio State. Now, as the main leader of that offense, Sonny Styles is also returning. Lose defensive coordinator Jim Knowles to Penn State. Will he be able to replicate that same output that he did this past season? I obviously believe that he can. He is a fantastic player, ball hawk, knows exactly what the opponent's offense is doing. There was one clip I saw of him one time. He was basically talking about how he was studying film from when he was like a very young age, and it's obviously translated onto the field for him nowadays. So I'm curious how he'll be the mainstay of that Ohio State defense going forward. And if a different system, not under Jim Knowles, will be able to be a factor or not for Caleb Downs going into this next season. At number 4, we have Arch Manning. Now, arguably the most hyped, obviously warranted, granted, heck of a talent, Arch Manning, and he arguably has the most hype going into this next season of any player in college football. Starting quarterback at Texas obviously isn't a position to joke about, play about. He's got some shoes to fill, obviously, with Quinn Ewers going to the NFL draft. But Texas fans have been waiting for this for a very, very long time. They've watched Arch sit for 2 years now by Quinn Ewers, and now they finally get to see him, be the starting quarterback for Texas. Now, does Steve Sarkisian, I don't want to say switch up the offense, but obviously put in some different plays to focus on Arch Manning's more mobile aspect to his game as compared to Quinn Ewers? Sure. He might run a zone read a time or two, a little more RPO action going into it. But, I think Arch Manning definitely could be the player to look for the most in 2025. All the question marks surrounding Texas. Obviously, heartbreaking loss to Ohio State in the semifinals. And Arch Manning is now your starting quarterback at Texas. So very curious to see how he will play in 2025. Now, number 3, this might be a little controversial to some people. I have Ryan Williams. Once again, another freshman on this list, receiver for Alabama. Arguably the greatest play I've ever seen in my freaking life against Georgia, where he jumped over 2 receivers, did a spin move, pulled out his mouthpiece in the middle of the play. Unbelievable talent. Now, tons of question marks around this pick. Now, Ryan Williams, am I picking him just solely based on his athletic ability? It's debatable. Obviously there's questions surrounding the quarterback position. Ty Simpson, Keelan Russell, and Austin Mack, who will be the starting quarterback for Alabama. New offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb. Well, the last time we saw Grubb in the college game, he was at Washington, made it to a national championship with Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. Will Ryan Williams under Grubb be able to produce that same output that Odunze, McMillan, and Polk did that last season that Grubb was at Washington? Coming over from the Seahawks, Grubb was originally touted to be the Alabama offensive coordinator before last season, and he got an offer from the Seahawks. Obviously, went with the Seahawks last season. Did all right in the NFL, but then obviously decided to stick by Kalen DeBoer, his longtime friend and coaching assistant, and come be the offensive coordinator at Alabama. So Ryan Williams is my number 3 player to look out for. He has a massive impact on the game. In my opinion, and similar to Jeremiah Smith at number 1, we'll get to that in a second. Whichever quarterback can get Ryan Williams the ball the most efficiently, the best, whoever can get him the ball the most effectively should be the starting quarterback of Alabama. At number 2, we have Drew Allar. Now, is this a little biased as a kid, now young adult, growing up as a Penn State fan? Sure. But I'm going to be completely transparent here. I'm not going to try to be an ounce biased when I say this. He has the most to prove of any player in college football this upcoming season. And I say that because of the way his 2024 season ended with that game against Notre Dame. We're not going to talk about it. If you know. If you watch the game, if you're a Penn State fan, It obviously didn't end how he expected it to, how Penn State fans expected it to, and now he is returning. He could have gone in the NFL draft. He was projected to be a first-round pick in some mocks, but that's neither here nor there. He's returning to Penn State along with Singleton, along with Allen, along with Dani Dennis Sutton, along with Zakee Wheatley, and there's definitely question marks surrounding that offense. Now, Kotelnicki is still there, Andy Kotelnicki, offensive coordinator. So year 2 in his system for Drew Allar. No Tyler Warren, his number 1 target, by far his number 1 target. Loses his top 2 receivers to the portal. Now, they have gotten some pieces back in the portal, and their names are escaping me at this current moment, but they did get a few receivers back in the portal. Now, will they be able to produce at the same level that they came into Penn State? I am not sure. We will see. Obviously, a spring ball comes around, but Drew Allar needs receiver help. If he is going to produce at the level that some scouts and obviously Penn State fans and coaches believe that he can perform at, they need outside receivers. And once again, he has the most to prove of anybody on this list because of the way that his season ended and his decision to come back. Now, I think it's very smart that he's coming back because, obviously the way his season ended, that's not the way he wanted it to go. Penn State fans, his teammates, his coaches, and that doesn't look good going into the draft immediately after that because, that's the last image that scouts and GMs and coaches think about when they talk to Drew Allar. That's the first thought that's going to come in their mind is, why did you throw that ball against Notre Dame? That's the first question, in my opinion, that they're going to ask him. Or what was the read? I know you said in your press conference you tried to dirt it at him, but I mean that to me that would be the first question that they would ask him. So personally, Drew Allar has the most to prove going into the 2025 season. He is my number 2 top 10 returning player. And number 1, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this one. Obviously, the best player in the country, by far, a freak of nature, an alien, the best wide receiver in the country, the best offensive player in the country, on the best team in the country, Jeremiah Smith, a freshman, freak of nature. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you know Jeremiah Smith, if you watch college football, you know who Jeremiah Smith is. Not a lot I have to say about that. So that is my top 10 returning players for the 2025 season. Now, I do want to give an honorable mention. It was a toss-up between the combo Singleton and Allen with Florida quarterback DJ Lagway. I do think he is in a, I don't want to say similar situation, obviously, to Arch Manning and Drew Allar, some quarterbacks on this list, but true freshman last season for Florida. Finished the season really well with Florida, knocked off Ole Miss and LSU and won their bowl game. I can't remember who they beat off the top of my head at this current moment, but DJ Lagway has the potential to be a very, very dangerous quarterback going into this season and into the future at Florida and the NFL. So I definitely think DJ Lagway is also a player to mention in this list. So he's right off. He is right off this list with Singleton and Allen. So that is my top 10 returning players for the 2025 season. Now, the Big 12 just announced their schedule. I know you can't really see it on this graphic right here. It's a little blurry, a little small for you guys. I couldn't really find a different one to put up there, but some takeaways from this. Obviously, week 0, Iowa State and Kansas State will meet in Dublin. That's a terrible accent. I don't know why I did that. Dublin, Ireland for a week 0 matchup, and arguably the best week 0 game, at least that I can remember. Iowa State and Kansas State, 2 ranked teams, conference game to open up the season. That's going to be exciting. That's definitely one to watch as we kick off in Dublin, Iowa State and Kansas State. Now, moving to week 1, we have some interesting games throughout the Big 12. Baylor at Auburn. That's definitely a key one to watch based on how Baylor finished last season and the question mark at quarterback for Auburn. Will it be Jackson Arnold starting? We'll see. Obviously, I think he is touted to be the starter there, with all of his experience at Oklahoma, but we will see. Cincinnati against Nebraska, that will be on Thursday night of opening week. Nebraska, Dylan Raiola, year 2, against Cincinnati, not a pushover by any means. So yeah, I think that'll be a very interesting game. It does say it's a neutral site. That's what that gray box means. Against that for that first game for Cincinnati. So I'm not sure where they're playing that, but it is a neutral site. So that'll be interesting to watch. TCU at North Carolina week 1. Now, this is particularly interesting because this will be Bill Belichick's first game in charge of North Carolina. And, obviously NFL legend, multiple time Super Bowl winner with the Patriots, obviously coach of Tom Brady for a long time. And it's very interesting, very wild that he is in college football now with North Carolina. So that's why that game really stands out to me. Obviously, Bill Belichick, his first game at North Carolina. So against a not a pushover opponent either in TCU. They don't get a FBS team or an FCS team to start. They don't get a group of 5 team to start. So obviously TCU not a pushover, so that'll be interesting for North Carolina. But they do get the benefit of being at home against TCU, so that'll be interesting to watch. And then an old Pac-12 reunion in week 1, Utah at UCLA. UCLA, first year in the Big Ten last year. They adjusted and pulled off some decent wins. Last season. The first one that comes to mind is obviously at Rutgers. Traveling all the way across the country, and knocking off the Scarlet Knights. They obviously did better within the conference than some people would have thought. And then Utah, complete down year. The injury situation that they had was staggering. But Kyle Whittingham does return. There's a whole bunch of questions surrounding Utah. Will they be able to bounce back with Kyle Whittingham? Some people say Kyle Whittingham should have been gone, should have been fired based off of last season. But that would be definitely another interesting one to watch as we reform the Pac-12 in that matchup. And now Kansas State. Now, I do want to make note of Kansas State's first 4 games. Obviously we talked about their game against Iowa State and Ireland, but their first 4 games aren't really something to mess around with, because they definitely could be not the easiest games, obviously. So Iowa State open up the season for Kansas State, and then they have North Dakota at home. Not the best FCS opponent, so we'll see about that. North Dakota finished 5-7 last year, but FCS opponent, nothing to overlook. But then week 3 they have Army. Now it's interesting because Army finished won the American Conference. Won the American Conference, so they go to Manhattan in week 3 to play Kansas, or I guess that's week 2, their third game against Kansas State. That'll be very intriguing to watch how Army matches up against a Big 12 team, running the triple option offense, that they do run at Army. And then week 3, I guess it would be their 4th game, though, at Arizona, second conference game at Arizona. And that'll be their first true road test other than Iowa State, but that's, in Ireland, it's a neutral game. So their first true road test at Arizona in week 4. Very interesting to me. Very, very curious to watch out for Kansas State early on in the season. And yeah, that is the Big 12 schedule. Obviously, we'll be discussing it further as we move along in the off season. Some notable matchups later on in the season, but we will definitely keep an eye out for the Big 12. Now, On3 released earlier this week their top 25 coaches list. Now, this is per Ari Wasserman. All props to Ari. Love watching your show with Andy. Now, I have a few gripes with this list. First off, number 25, Matt Campbell. Now, I believe Matt Campbell to be a better coach than number 25, personally. I mean, just based off this last season, he took Iowa State to their best ever season with 11 wins and knocked off one of the best players in the country last season in Cam Ward in Miami in their last game. Now, granted, Cam Ward played for only the first half, but I think it's definitely something to take into account. I personally think Matt Campbell should be higher on this list. Not insanely higher, but I think a few spots. He's been considered for a handful of NFL jobs, over the past couple off seasons. So I just think he definitely should be a little higher on this list. Next one, I want to talk about Bill Belichick at number 21. We've never seen him in the college game before, especially today's college football with all the NIL and transfer portal and stuff like that. He's been out recruiting. He has Michael Lombardi in as the GM with him, so there's definitely speculation over how UNC will be under Bill Belichick. I can only imagine they'll be obviously better than last season. It's Bill Belichick. There obviously has to be some improvement based on last season. The next one I want to talk about is Lance Leipold, number 14 for Kansas. Now, granted, Kansas did finish the 2024 season, won 3 out of their last 4 games. Knocked off Colorado, beat Iowa State, knocked off then undefeated BYU. So there's definitely some momentum going into the season for Lance Leipold in Kansas. Now, they did finish blown out by Baylor in their last game, but that could be just one point that doesn't really go with the trend. But I just think it's a little odd to have Lance Leipold this high, especially when you have James Franklin there at 15, just made to the college football playoff semifinals. Brian Kelly at 16 with this talent he has at LSU. Lane Kiffin, obviously, probably will be posting about this on X later if he saw this list. So Lance Leipold is definitely a question mark for me. But that did finish 5-7 last year with Kansas. So just something to make note of. Kyle Whittingham at 8. Now, personally, I would go with DeBoer over him. I would personally take Cignetti over Whittingham. If we're just basing this off last season, I would take Kenny Dillingham over Whittingham. Now, has Kyle Whittingham rode the coattails of Cam Rising, for however long he's been there now, like 8 years, like maybe. I mean, it feels like 8 years. He's like ancient now. But anyway, I don't really get the Kyle Whittingham hype. I might be missing something, but last time I checked, Kalen DeBoer just coached in a national championship 2 years ago. Obviously, he's at Alabama. This first season there didn't go as planned, but I would take Kalen DeBoer over him. Mario Cristobal has been said to be a really good coach by people close to Miami. Obviously their product on the field last season was up for debate, defensively. But anyway, I would personally take Curt Cignetti. He's outlandish. He makes some comments that, doesn't really, stick with the media well. But Curt Cignetti, took care of business last season against the teams he was supposed to take care of business against. And then Kenny Dillingham obviously led Arizona State to one of their best seasons in history, winning the Big 12 after being picked to finish last. So I don't know. I feel like Kyle Whittingham could slide a little bit on this list, slide down a little bit. But I would definitely, personally, I would be taking DeBoer over Whittingham. Cignetti would be a debate. Dillingham would be a debate. But I definitely think Kyle Whittingham is a little high on this list. And the last one I was a little curious about was Deion. Now, there's no debate that Deion has, carried Colorado from out of the depths, 4-8 his first season to 9-3 this last season, 10-3. sorry, 9-4, something like that. Just completely turned it around. Turned it around for Colorado. Got them to the Alamo Bowl against BYU and lost. But obviously, their defense was 10 times better than it was the season before. Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, obviously the Heisman Trophy winner. Will Deion be able to carry the momentum from this 2024 season into 2025 with his retooled star power? Juju Lewis comes in, 5-star quarterback. Caden Salter transfers in from Liberty. He was a highly touted quarterback there. Dallin Hayden from Ohio State, running back, transfers in. Dayon Hayes from Pitt, according to some sources, was the number 3 transfer player at defensive end. So, there's definitely questions around Colorado going into this season, and they open up with Georgia Tech, who's not a pushover by any stretch of the imagination to open up the season. So, I like Deion. I like Deion at 7. But I'm just curious. I'm just wondering how he's going to fare going into this next season. Obviously with off-season stories too. Rumors again, the Cowboys job with his relationship with Jerry Jones being one of the greatest players in Dallas Cowboys history. So we'll see. We'll see with Deion, but I think he does. I think he does a good job going into this next season. With the talent he has. I think players gravitate to him more than some of the other coaches on this list, more than others. So Deion's definitely one to look out for. And finally, our last topic for today, 2025 win total is released by FanDuel. This is per on 3, obviously. Now, some key totals that were interesting to me when I first looked at this. The Florida total at 6.5. Now, their schedule is once again a gauntlet, which completely makes no sense. Is completely unfair. And Florida's total at 6.5. Colorado's total also at 6.5. Losing their 2 best players. Definitely are something to look out for. And then Florida brings me back to DJ Lagway. If he's able to perform to the level that he did at the end of last season, I definitely believe that he can carry them to over this win total. And some people think an outside shot at the playoff. So it's definitely one to look out for. North Carolina, 7.5. Now, this is solely the Bill Belichick effect. Now, 7.5, I think, is a good number. Now, I personally think they finished 6-6 in the regular season. 7-6 if they win their bowl game. Now, that's obviously factoring in. We don't know what they look like right now, but based off this initial number, I'm gonna have to go under for North Carolina personally. Michigan at 8.5. Now, I think Michigan will obviously be a step up from last season with Bryce Underwood quarterback. I do think Bryce Underwood will be the quarterback of Michigan this upcoming season, even though he's being a true freshman now. I do think this one will also be close. 8.5. That's a very good number for Michigan. I say they just get over, but I think with their bowl game, or they make it like 9-3 right at the end of the season. So, Texas at 9.5. Now, this number's a little down, obviously, because the questions surrounding Arch Manning at quarterback. They'll definitely be a team to watch. Arch Manning will be the price of admission with Texas. So 9.5 is definitely doable for Texas. We obviously saw that last season. So 9.5 is interesting. LSU at 8.5. It feels a little low, only because Garrett Nussmeier is coming back at quarterback, and obviously in college football nowadays, experience is everything. So 8.5 feels a little low for me personally for LSU. Like, I project them out at 9 or 10 wins. So it's interesting. Clemson at 9.5. Tom Allen leaving from Penn State to go be the defensive coordinator there. There's definitely potential there. Cade Klubnik coming back at quarterback again. ACC schedule could be difficult for some teams, but the level that Clemson is at, with the amount of players they have returning, and obviously experienced quarterback in K Klubnik, I definitely think they could go over this total for sure. And that will be it for our very first episode of the Love for the Game podcast. I want to thank you for joining us today. Remember to follow on all socials, LFTG Pod 01 at the top of the screen on all socials. Like, comment, and subscribe. I definitely want to hear your feedback on what we discussed today. Looking forward to it. And I really appreciate you guys checking this out. Thank you so much.